This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome to episode number 97 of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Chirco, alongside my usual sidekick and partner in crime. That is the Doc from Doc and Jock, John Charles Macaroon. John, how's it going?
Vito, my goodness, I'm not exactly sure if I'm looking forward to this conversation talking about the Tigers, or if we should have maybe preempted this week instead of next week's podcast. But the Tigers are home at the time of this recording, finally, after a disastrous road trip, and I'm very fascinated to get your take on it. Obviously, everybody has been quite negative, but do you feel like that win on Sunday really saved Brad Ausmus' job? Because everyone's debating it, and everyone's talking like, look, his job's really not in jeopardy. If he's not going to be with the club anymore, then likely it'll just be where the end of the year happens, his contract will, be up, and Al Avila will just likely say, look, we're not going to renew your contract. And I feel like that's the respect they're going to give Brad Ausmus if they do part ways. And that's a notion that I just totally disagree with.
Well, you know what? I really think that they should have fired him a long time ago. I've harped on that very matter. And you know what? Firing him now, what is it going to do for the Tigers? It's not going to do anything in 2017. They're not going to win with them or without him. But should they have fired him after this series against the Padres after losing 8 out of 9? Yeah, I full-heartedly believe that. But the thing is, I wasn't gung-ho about the Tigers actually deciding to fire him. I didn't believe it strongly because how many other times have we said, oh, they're going to fire him? How about last year we thought they were going to fire him? Would have made an impact, I think, last summer, too. They didn't fire him. Al Avila keeps hanging on to him. And I think more and more, Doc, I don't know what your opinion is. I think, and it's hard for me to accept as a non-fan of Brad Ausmus, but I think he's going to get another year on the job, a 5th year on the job in 2018.
It makes really no sense to allow it to happen because, each and every year, it seems like the team is regressing and the talent's not improving. His first year, he got to the postseason, but by all accounts and everybody that's looked at it has said that he was outmanaged significantly and by a wide margin by Buck Showalter of the Orioles. So you look at it and you say, with less talent, with less payroll, you're going to expect Brad Ausmus to kind of turn it around. That's a mighty tall stretch, sir. And I think that this homestand coming up, and we'll talk about it, the Tigers matchup versus Kansas City and the Cleveland Indians. This week is a huge week because I kind of get a sense, and it's kind of the calm before the storm, that the fans are ready to come out in full force with the Boo Birds.
Well, the only way you salvage this season, have a chance to even come close to being a contender this season, is by winning 9 out of 10 at home in this 10-game homestand, or winning all 10 games. And guess what? That's not going to happen. The Tigers team is not good enough to do that, Doc. Nor is many teams. I don't care how good you are. The Houston Astros, the LA Dodgers, the Cleveland Indians, who they're about to play after the Royals. These teams even aren't a guarantee to win 9 out of 10.
Now, I want to get your sense because we're not the only ones here, you and I, just sitting here talking about firing Brad Ausmus. National media, local media, a lot of the talk show hosts, fans are just saying, look, you have a guy in Omar Vizquel. He's sitting there. He's a guy that many people feel like could relate to the players, and maybe, just maybe, the hope is that you catch lightning in a bottle. Now, the odds would dictate that probably it won't happen because the talent will be decimated. Many people are thinking that J.D. Martinez, Justin Wilson, maybe Jose Iglesias, maybe on the off chance JV and Miggy could be gone from this team, so it's not likely. But in baseball, there are things that are happening. Just look at what's happening out there with the Angels. Many people would assume that, Mike Trout got hurt. And then all of a sudden you look at the Angels, they're now scoring more runs per game without Mike Trout. And they've had a winning streak without Mike Trout. If you went into that and said, look, Mike Trout's not going to be on your roster, you would say, okay, they're going to struggle. They're going to lose a bunch of games. But the Angels are playing better. So maybe, just maybe, if you mix up the roster and you play more young guys and you got a youthful manager, a real manager like Omar Vizquel that likely could do some things, the hope is that he's learned some things in his time playing Major League Baseball and working with the Detroit Tigers, that maybe, just maybe, you catch lightning in a bottle. And I think the thinking is that we all know we're not going to win with Brad Ausmus in this incarnation of the Tigers. So the only hope you say is it might be a small chance as opposed to 0% with Brad Ausmus. Maybe it's 12% with Omar Vizquel and a new roster. So I think that's why, even though the hope is small, in the grand scheme of things, the odds will dictate that the Tigers will not be successful. Many people believe with Brad Ausmus, the odds are 0. With Omar Vizquel or anybody else, it might be 10 to 15%, which is more than 0 if my math is correct.
It is, but are you going to fire Brad Ausmus for a 12% increase in probability of making the playoffs in 2017? With this incarnation of the Tigers, like you said, this version isn't good enough to win anything. So I don't care who you have as skipper. Last year's when you could have fired Ausmus, they had chances to do so when they struggled at times last year, especially early on in the season. And guess what? They chose not to fire him. Maybe then they could have put in the managerial role Omar Vizquel or somebody else, brought back Jim Leland, or just Vizquel, as you brought up, a guy that meshes in the clubhouse very well because he's a fellow Venezuelan. A lot of the Tigers are Venezuelans, including Miguel Cabrera. So when you have guys in the clubhouse that respect you as highly as the Tigers do with Omar Vizquel, Vizquel maybe last year, now without experience, just like Brad Ausmus, when he got the skipper job too with the Tigers, but maybe Vizquel, they could have caught more lightning in a bottle with him all of a sudden last year, maybe could have gone on more of a run and made the playoffs actually. And maybe could have done some damage. But guaranteeing that they could have done some damage in the postseason with an inexperienced skipper in Omar Vizquel, I wouldn't put money on that having happened last year. And now with the Tigers, if they chose to fire Brad Ausmus, and I'm not trying to defend him. Trust me, you know that, everybody that listens to this very podcast. I don't hold him in the highest esteem or prestige, Brad Ausmus. I don't think he deserves a lot of credit for anything the Tigers have done positively in his 4 years on the job. But right now, if you decide to fire him, I don't think you're making a big-time upgrade with this Tigers team and getting into the postseason if you fire him. I think it's too late for that to happen. And Al Avila and company in that front office of the Tigers might view it like this too, guys. That if they're going to sell and go into an extreme, full-on sell mode, well, you know what? Why hire somebody else when you just stick with the guy that the players know and respect, at least to some extent?
Well, let's just look at the use of K-Rod. I mean, obviously, he's no longer part of the Detroit Tigers roster. He's now part of the Nationals, and it would be quite embarrassing should he go out there and have some success. And I'm really shocked that Dusty Baker is even throwing him a bone to try and get what? I don't know what's left for a guy that throws 90 miles an hour and the king of the curveball, but I don't understand. I don't think he has nothing left, but they signed him to a minor league deal, but the odds of him going to the Nationals and having success are quite low. But Brad Ausmus said that, and maybe he was just, blowing smoke up everyone's ass, but he said that, behind the Wilsons, he was the best option.
That's laughable. But is that how depleted the Tigers' bullpen is? And the current state that the bullpen is in is because of who? Not Brad Ausmus, Al Avila.
But when we talked about it and when we were kind of planning the show, one of the articles around town that people respect and read, but at the same time also have question with and debate quite often, is the article written by Lynn Hennig. He said the manager's role, and he doesn't see that Brad Ausmus has done so much damage to the team that it would dictate that Brad Ausmus should be fired. And he kind of says that, managers at this point in time aren't doing a whole heck of a lot, and that he doesn't see a lot of things that Brad Ausmus is doing as being quite that detrimental as everybody else is seeing. And I think a point for me to disagree on is the use of Francisco Rodriguez. I feel like if he had not used him at all in the losing streak, you might have an opportunity to pick up another game, maybe when you were down 2 runs, instead of giving up a grand slam or a 2-run homer to extend their lead. Maybe they could have came back in the 9th inning with a 3-run home run. But whenever Brad used him, he struggled mightily. And it was a situation where I feel like some of the buttons that are being pressed by Brad Ausmus are not working properly. For example, when Jordan Zimmerman's dealing and you got, one more batter to face, you go with the lefty-lefty matchup. I think it was Stumpf versus the lefty. And what happens? Gives up a home run. And so you can go with what Brad Ausmus said and said, look, it's the players and it's on them, but you're putting them in certain positions. And more often than not, it doesn't seem like he catches magic in a bottle with the decisions that he makes. And the sabermetric people, if you just ask them, those that are into sabermetrics and realizing who should bat when, are really up in arms saying that Brad Ausmus consistently violates the basic tenets of sabermetrics. And, I don't know if you've seen this young cat that's out there really ranting and raving on Twitter after every game, but he was able to quickly figure out a batting matchup that was more advantageous that could have been utilized. And he said in his rant, he said, look, I found it in 4 seconds. So why doesn't Brad Ausmus have this information and just say, I'm going to go with what's sabermetrically proper each and every time? And then you can have a leg to stand on when you say, look, it's the players. I'm putting, Nick Castellanos in a situation where he has the advantage versus the pitcher. But if you ask, the sabermetrics people are up in arms, and they're saying that Brad Ausmus violates a lot of the tenets, and they can argue quite a bit that he's not a good manager, that if they just went to a guy that used sabermetrics and used it properly and understood how to implement it, the Tigers would maybe be a couple games better.
But he's been misunderstanding sabermetrics for a long time. He should have been fired a long time ago. So I'm not saying that he shouldn't be fired. I'm saying the Tigers and their front office, I think at this point, once they deal some major league pieces from this year's roster, I think they'll be of the mindset that they can't do much better than with Brad Ausmus as their skipper.
And so the debate is being had that, okay, let's just say Joe Madden had this roster. I really do believe that Joe Madden would have this team in a much better spot.
Not
than
this
Brad
year's
Ausmus.
team.
I do believe so. I believe that maybe he could have utilized different guys in the bullpen at different times, and maybe they wouldn't have been so worn out. Maybe Alex Wilson would be utilized in much better matchups. Maybe Rondon would not have been sent down. Maybe there would have been a situation where they would have performed, or maybe been, not utilized in the same fashion as Brad Ausmus has utilized them. And so just look at a small inkling, okay? How is it that Miguel Cabrera comes out and tells the media he's hurt? And then when Brad Ausmus was asked about it previously, he comes out and says, I don't think nothing's wrong with Miggy. So you believe him because why? He had numerous throws from the pitchers to first base. There was a game where Miggy looked and said, hey, why are you throwing to first base this much? Which would indicate that either Brad didn't know, which is egregious, or if he knows, then why are you calling so many throws where Miguel Cabrera has to stretch, which could re-injure or further cause damage to whatever he's got going on? So either way, Brad Ausmus looks stupid. In that situation alone, that small microcosm, either Brad doesn't know he's hurt, and that's egregious, or he does know, and then you would say, okay, if you know Miguel is, battling stuff and he's dealing with things, why are you calling so many throws to first base? Do you want your leader of the team looking at you like that and giving you glares like, dude, what's the problem? So that's one of those things where that's just a small microcosm, and I really do believe that someone else, a different voice, could come in here now, and the notion of change for change's sake, there is value in that. I don't just poo-poo that like several others have.
But right now, they're 9 games under 500, 33-42.
Ooh.
So any manager that comes in, takes a job from Brad Ausmus, I think would not do too much better with this year's roster. I think as they're structured, they're severely flawed. And for me, if you go to another manager, I don't think any alternative solution would be the best solution right now for this team that, once again, is extremely flawed. And Ausmus has made boneheaded decisions in a large manner for a long time in his 4 total years as Tiger skipper. He's made these decisions, and some of them repeatedly, yet he hasn't been removed from his job as Tigers manager. So what is going to be the reason why now Avila calls on him to be fired, calls him into his office and says, you're gone as Tiger skipper? I know they've underachieved, but this team also is flawed. It's more about them being flawed, and there's not a lot of things to fix the Tigers right now that anybody can do. They just need to make some trades, some shrewd moves to get this team younger and built better for the future.
So is this week where the Tigers play Kansas City and the Cleveland Indians, do you think this is going to be the telling week where they're going to play at home, they're going to play in front of their home crowd, and it's one last gasp to see what this team can do? Because the notion was, and John Morosi reported it, that the deadline date was the end of June. If this team is still, and you say there's a week left, if this team is, let's say, 12 games under 500, let's say they, go, 4-6, and they're 12 games under 500, do you think then maybe by the time of the All-Star break that the trades will start happening? Because it seems like the more and more people talk about it, and as each day comes, the deadline extends. Where Al Avila did come out, though, and said to the otherwise, where he said, look, this team, if there's an opportunity to sell, I could do it now. I could make some moves, and I might entertain some realistic offers. So what is it? I'm kind of in the camp of I'm waiting for this team to make that move to give us some sense of hope. I watched the games, but it really became laughable. And I was telling Jason the other day, a lot of people are tweeting me on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. Who cares? I would throw out a poll, or I would say, is JV's stat line going to be good tonight? 6 to 2 dozen? Who cares? A lot of people are beyond angry, beyond concerned or worried about the Tigers. They're becoming apathetic. And if you look at the attendance and you look at some of the vibe with the Tigers, at least from what I'm seeing, the vibe is down. And if it turns to apathetic, there's still half a season left. This could be quite a long summer, and one where I don't think the fans that are going to go down there are going to be, all jovial and happy when they go down there. If the bullpen implodes, you're going to hear a lot of boos. If Miguel Cabrera continues to hit poorly or doesn't do the job, I think there's going to be quite the angry fan base that's going to be letting this team have it, because I'm not so certain that this fan base is ready to just say, kumbaya, the last 10 years were great. They're fed up, and they're almost apathetic.
By the way, Miguel Cabrera, you brought up that it's on Ausmus for why he's hurt and maybe has a lingering injury with that groin, all the throws over to first base. Doesn't help him out. But remember, Cabrera made the decision himself to play for Team Venezuela in the World Baseball Classic and has the ultimate right to make that decision to play for his home country. So for me, he got hurt then. The injury's been lingering since then. Ausmus can only do so much to salvage the situation. And this fan base is apathetic. By the way, in the American League now, in total attendance this season, Tigers are ranked number 11 out of 15 American League ball clubs. That is not good. The attendance could continue to dip if they make some trades dealing away major veteran pieces such as JD Martinez, who I still see as being that first domino to fall for the Tigers that could lead to more trades. Or maybe, Doc, I'm realizing this more and more and having to accept it as a Tigers fan and pundit here talking about the Tigers here on Tigers Talk, then maybe they only deal JD Martinez for a big coup. And that's it. And they wait until the offseason, until Ian Kinsler, Anibal Sanchez, guys like that leave in free agency, because they're not going to pick up, for sure, Anibal Sanchez's team option. Maybe not even Ian Kinsler's team option. They might just let them walk in free agency and get nothing basically in return for them.
If you're checking out the news regarding the Detroit Tigers, there's not really a lot of positives going on. Did you hear some of the demotions going on from AAA Toledo to Erie? Moya not being promoted, but being demoted. And it's quite rare that you hear a lot of news being made about guys that are going from AAA to lower affiliates. But it's interesting now that there's a purge going on among the Major League Baseball roster all across the minors. And you look at it and you go, ooh, who's the next guy that's going to come up to contribute? Many people have, before the season started, ranked the Detroit Tigers minor league system as being awful. So it really does kind of hamper you in a lot of different ways, where you look at the minors, you go, yeah, there's going to be some players that are going to be coming up that can contribute. But unless you're going to commit to an entire organizational youth movement, it just seems like right now the news surrounding the Detroit Tigers is a little bit muddy, murky. And again, like the tone of this podcast, it's just one of those things where they got to do a lot of things a lot better, and they got to do a lot of winning.
And you know what? On Fox Sports 1, they were talking about this very matter on MLB Whip Around on Monday night. Kevin Burkhardt, the host, Dontrell Willis,
the
D-Train.
Did you say MLB Whip It Out?
Not Whip It Out. I'll do that another time, maybe, but not on this podcast or with you in my presence.
What's the show called?
Major League Baseball MLB Whip Around. Whip Around, okay. Not Whip It Out. We'll do that later tonight, maybe, Doc, you and I. Or just me, without you, probably being there. But anyways, MLB Whip Around, the host Kevin Burkhardt and these guys with John Paul Morosi, JP Morosi, whatever he goes by now on Twitter, and it is, reporting. Well, they were saying that the Tigers, the sad thing is about them is their farm system is so depleted that there's nothing in the farm system to call up once they make these trades, or just to rejuvenate the roster as it is right now without making trades. That is a sad state the Tigers farm system does exist in. And something that Tigers fans, you and I as well, Doc, have to accept, that until they make some deals to rejuvenate their farm system, they're not going to really have the chance, to call up guys that will make an impact on this year's roster.
Okay, Vito, you've lined up a great guest again this week. Who will be on the phone line after this quick timeout?
Al Willman from the Detroit News, who soon enough will no longer be writing for the News, too. He'll be up right after this quick commercial break on episode number 97 of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. And Doc, as you know, our newest partner is the Detroit Sports Commission. And since 2001, the Detroit Sports Commission has applied its expert touch to marketing and to selling the Metro Detroit area as a marquee destination for regional, national, and even international amateur sporting events. And through the Detroit Sports Commission's help, these events have attracted thousands of visitors and pumped millions of dollars into our local economy. It is why Detroit is now not only the place where champions are made, but also the place where championships are played. So to find out more about the Detroit Sports Commission and all of the events they are bringing to our very region, please follow the DSC on Twitter and also on Instagram at DET Sports, and check out their fine website at DetroitSports.org. And now joining me on episode number 97 of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company is Al Willman of The Detroit News, who soon enough will no longer be writing for the News. And we'll talk about that a little bit with Al as well. But first, let me just say hello. Al, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing great, Vito. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Very great to hear from you. It's been a long time because you have been on the podcast before, but I don't remember when. It was last season at some point. And when you were still a writer for the News, as you are right now, but I know soon you are leaving for a new gig at the Paducah Sun. I believe that's how you say it. And it's a daily newspaper located in Paducah, Kentucky. So tell me about that gig and what you'll be doing for that new newspaper.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be one of 2 full-time sports writers covering 21 different high schools and Murray State University. So you might recognize them from basketball season. Their perennial, tournament appearances every year. It seems like they're really successful on the hardwood. But my main focus is going to be covering the 21 high schools. So football, baseball, basketball, you name it. I'll be down there doing it.
So what made it the right time, Al, for you to leave the News?
Well, it's been a great 3 years over there, but it was a part-time gig, like with your experiences with the Free Press. So part-time can only go so far. And obviously it's time to get a career started and get going, and I'm excited to do that. And Paducah's the place where that's going to be. It's just I interviewed for the job and had a great experience with the folks down there, and I'm really excited to get started with a great team.
Well, best of luck to you with that, Al, and I know you'll do great. Now, speaking of great, the Tigers aren't that right now. Losers of 8 of their last 9 games. They lost 2 out of 3 over the weekend against San Diego in San Diego. Many had thought, including myself, that possibly the Tigers would fire Ausmus on their day off Monday. It didn't happen. And now I'm thinking more and more, Al, that once the Tigers officially decide to boot on 2017 and start selling off some major veteran pieces, most notably J.D. Martinez, that they'll decide to retain Ausmus for next season. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that this season on paper, it started out as something that could be pretty successful, but I don't think anybody thought they're going to be one of those teams that goes out and wins 100 games. They didn't. The talent just isn't there for that. And looking at how they've, went to the West Coast there and lost 8 of 9, that's just, I think, really hammering home the point that this team at the trade deadline needs to seriously consider selling and get younger, get some of these big contracts off the books, and start rebuilding for the future.
Yeah, they're not going to win this season. I mean, how many of us know that already? But I think at times the front office, Al Avila, most notably the Tigers general manager, hasn't accepted it yet. And it's just crazy to believe that may be the narrative in the Tigers front office right now as we speak on Tuesday, June 27th, Al.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, that, a lot of people were hammering on, Dave Dombrowski. He was still a general manager for some of the trades that he made and devastating the minor league system the way he did to get bigger players in who can play now. But I think the focus needs to be for Al Avila to make his signature and his impact felt here is to get younger and to revitalize the team for the future. And getting rid of some of the Mark Lowe earlier on in the season and getting rid of K-Rod just this last week and making moves like that, that's a start to the process. But I think, there's a lot of work left to do to make this team into something that fans can be happy to watch.
And it seems like he waited a long time to get rid of K-Rod, to get rid of Mark Lowe. I mean, the Tigers fan base wanted these guys gone a long time ago, and he finally pulled the trigger. So as I view the Tigers nearing the July 31 non-waiver trade deadline, I feel more and more, Al, that they might just deal J.D. Martinez, and that's it. And I think they're going to deal him very close to that trade deadline. Maybe they'll get more in return because of that. But I don't know if they're going to deal Upton, Alex Avila, Ian Kinsler, guys like that anymore, or Justin Wilson. What do you think about it?
Well, I think there are a couple of guys that, you mentioned there that are pretty easy to look at and say, okay, these are guys that run a trade, as a franchise and as a fan base, and, understanding that they're going to go and accepting that they're going to go are 2 totally different things. So take for the first example, J.D. Martinez, the guy who I think on the entire roster can get the biggest return. You can maybe get a couple of major league ready players, and you can stock up your minor league system by getting rid of him. And obviously, the closer you get to the trade deadline, the more offers you listen to, the more you can kind of play hardball in that way. But I think he's going to be the first guy to go. Justin Wilson is a guy who I've heard Washington was looking at, maybe trading for a reliever. I know they just signed K-Rod, some minor league deal here yesterday. But, looking at, I think Justin Wilson has a potential to leave for someone who's looking for a decent late inning guy. Alex Avila, I don't think is going anywhere. He's going to stay here, and Justin Upton, I think both those two guys are going to stay. You're looking at Alex Avila coming off of his best season as a Tiger, 1 year away, and he's obviously been hitting the ball really well here in the late spring. But the two guys, like I mentioned, are probably my first guys out of town are Justin Wilson and JD Martinez.
Now, Al, I got a question for you regarding Brad Ausmus. A lot of people are debating whether or not a move would influence this team because of the roster and obviously the deficiencies with the roster. Can any, managerial change that you think of, in the recent past that sparked the team, can you recall any? Because many people are like, well, if you remove Brad Ausmus, the team's not going to improve all that much anyway. But I would say, in my opinion, is that if you try out an Omar Vizquel, maybe, just maybe, you can catch lightning in a bottle. Does any team that you recall that caught lightning in a bottle in the recent past?
Well, not in like a mid-season move, but the manager I can think of that kind of had a change of scenery and did the most good with it was Terry Francona going for his time in Boston, going to Cleveland, and obviously last year they went to the World Series. So I think first upset as fans are, and rightfully so, with the lack of success that it seems like Brad Ausmus is having. I think. And I was calling for it last year and years before for him to be fired. So I'm not sitting here going back on what I'm saying. But I think the most prudent move to happen would be just ride it out the rest of the year. You know what's going to happen this year. There's a long shot that this team even makes the playoffs, let alone further than that. So ride it out, and say at the end of the season, okay, we're going in a different direction and make a change that way. But to say, asking to catch lightning in a bottle and a mid-season change at this point, there's nothing really that comes to mind to me that screams like the best option.
Yeah, this current team is not fixable. I don't think you can salvage this season with any kind of managerial move at this point, where last year maybe you could have, when they had chances to fire Ausmus, especially early on last season when they were struggling, and people were harping on the fact that Ausmus should have been gone. They never fired him, stuck with them, and they didn't make the playoffs. Do you think they could have made the playoffs last year if they would have fired Ausmus?
It's easy to look at it now, almost a year later, from when a lot of people were calling the last time for Ausmus to be fired and say, there are certain things they could have done differently to maybe make the playoffs. But I think the way the team was constructed isn't too different from the way the team is constructed now, with just people who were in the picture last year that should have been, and that's starting to show now with, like I said earlier in this talk, is Mark Lowe and K-Rod as two guys who are no longer in the picture. Anibal Sanchez, who I still can't make my mind up on. But looking at that, making a managerial change is just putting a different guy behind the wheel in a car that's still got 4 flat tires. There's other fixes that you have to make.
Yeah, they do, and it's about Al Avila making those moves as we near that July 31 non-waiver trade deadline. And Al Willman of the Detroit News on with me for episode number 97 of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. And Al, as we continue to dissect the Brad Ausmus issue, I wanted to play a quick game of Big Vito's over-under, a very popular game nationwide, maybe even worldwide now. Everybody knows about it, Al. And I can tell you're not too high on the chances of the Tigers firing Ausmus. So playing a game of Big Vito's over-under and over-under 50% for the odds of Ausmus being the manager at season's end.
You said the over-under's at 50%? I'll take the over.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I don't think he's going anywhere this year.
Yeah, and what are the chances for you? Because I can tell you're very not optimistic. You're very pessimistic on the chances of Ausmus being fired at this point.
Yeah, you could say that. I don't necessarily think it's optimistic versus pessimistic. I think it's just looking at it as a realist and looking at the way this team is constructed in the front office and as much work as Al Avila has to do. I think shooting from the hip and firing Brad Ausmus at this point is not going to accomplish much, if anything.
Who do you think would get the job right now if they did indeed fire Ausmus? Because my co-host, John, who you've talked to now, he was talking about Omar Vizquel. I think he's kind of a fan favorite right now, because if not him, I could see Lloyd McClendon or Gene Lamont getting the job, and that's not too appeasing to me. And I think it's not too appeasing to many Tigers fans either if McClendon or Lamont get the job.
Well, McClendon, you got to think about, he's got some managerial experience with Pittsburgh. I know he was, had, I wouldn't say great success there. I wouldn't say he had much success there, but he's got experience. Gene Lamont has been a finalist for several managerial jobs in the last, several years. And Omar Vizquel is kind of a new face to the managerial game. He's had a little bit of experience in the World Baseball Classic this past year, but he's the least experienced of the three, the youngest of the three, But I think looking at his playing career, he's probably the more popular of all the three choices, which is why you mentioned he's a fan favorite at this point. Because people still recognize him from his playing days and being one of the best gloves in the middle infield in the last 20 years. So I think of those three, probably would go to Gene Lamont as the bench coach, since he's the second in command basically on the field. But I would give a good hard look at Omar Vizquel if that decision were made.
And I think almost to just appease the fan base, you might go in the direction of Omar Vizquel. And in that clubhouse, I think he's also a fan favorite, Al.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that he's very popular both with the fans and the players. But why would you throw a job to a guy on a sinking ship, with not a lot of likelihood of this team turning things around in such a drastic way that they could make a meaningful playoff appearance and run? So to give a guy his first major league managerial gig as basically a stopgap, that doesn't do any good to the guy that you're giving that job to. So I think would be doing Omar Vizquel a disservice if that was the direction they decided to go in.
If you were to look at the squad and say, okay, if one area of the team's performance could improve and that would allow for the team to play better, maybe to consistently perform at the level where they could maybe even get closer to 500, what one improvement does this squad need in order to improve the overall play this season?
It needs to jumpstart itself offensively. I mean, obviously a lot of us harp on the bullpen and the inconsistency there, and we've seen it. But look at the number of times, just even on this road stand, that the Tigers' offense seemed to be kind of asleep at the wheel. You had the shutout in Seattle. You had, I think there's another shutout in San Diego, too. And a couple of low-run appearances in between on that, 8 of the 9 games where you eke out maybe a few runs at a time. Look at that across the whole season. And the Tigers, the one thing that's really killed them is clutch and timely hitting.
They could use that spark. I mean, I know you had mentioned that.
The motivation, the jump start that can go into a team when it gets timely hitting, whether it's in the 4th inning with a couple of guys on base, or you're down and running the 9th and you get a couple of guys on, that the contagious nature of that, of a clutch and timely hit, reflects on the rest of the team.
And I think of a spark plug in the form of Cameron Maybin. How much would they love to have him again? He is crushing the baseball and hitting for average specifically, so getting on base. And since Mike Trout went down, he's been Mike Trout light without all the power, but he's getting on base, like I said, hitting very well at the top of the Halos lineup. How much would they benefit from having him in center field? And especially when you look at the fact that what they got in return is very lackluster. They got a double-A arm in Victor Alcantara from the Halos. I mean, this guy is never going to reach the majors, and if he does, he's a relief arm, middle innings relief arm, nothing of high value.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to see what's happened with Cam Maybin, the last few years. Obviously, the Tigers let him go this year for it seems like just about nothing, and to have the success that he's having now, he wasn't having that success early in the season. His bat was cold for most of April and the start of May, and to now see what he's done, May through June, it's impressive. Do I think he'd make necessarily a good fit for the Tigers? Sure. I mean, he was a good spark play. He was great, but he was good down the stretch last year when he finally got healthy. But to me, I think it goes more than just one guy. The Tigers need a couple of 3 different, players in different spots to make something happen.
Well, they have a lot of flat tires, as you said. You said, what, 4 or 5 flat tires they have? So you can't just fix the ball club with one player.
A car with 4 flats, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not good for a car and for any team when you use that analogy, too, because they could use so many reinforcements. And that's why maybe, Al, it's come time to make that bold move of dealing Justin Verlander or Miguel Cabrera. They might not be that bold, but what are the chances of either of those moves happening, in your opinion?
Miguel Cabrera is not going anywhere. I don't think. His career will end in the Old English D, as do, I think, Justin Verlander. The time to trade Verlander was last year, or maybe even 2 years ago, when there were still, not as many diminishing returns with him. Obviously, they paid him that big contract and showed the franchise that he was the direction, he was the ace. Letting Max Scherzer go and look at the success now he's having in Washington. I still think, and I will always think, that will go down as one of the top, maybe 2 or 3 front office blunders the Tigers have ever made, is letting Max Scherzer walk and not getting rid of Justin Verlander. When they still could have gotten some kind of return like I'm thinking they'll get for J.D. Martinez this year. So you're looking at 2 guys who are they're heavily invested in, who are the faces of the franchise. Both of those 2 guys, I really don't think are going anywhere.
Yeah, you know what? Letting Max Scherzer walk like the Tigers did. That was a big-time blunder on the part of Dave Dombrowski, but you know what? Al Willman never makes blunders, and that has been Al Willman of the Detroit News. Hey, best of luck to you as well with the Paducah Sun. All right, I'll make sure to check out your work.
Thanks a lot, Vito, and I'll make sure to keep listening to your podcast. You guys do great work.
Great to hear, man. Thank you much, and have a good one. And that was Al Willman of the Detroit News on episode number 97 of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Doc, always a pleasure to have him along for the ride to deliver some Tigers insight. He, I know, used to, at least last season, in a big way, he did a lot of live in-game blogs about the Tigers. I don't think as many this year. Now, a guy that has done those this year more and more is that Jeff Robinson, who we had on the podcast as well. So now we're all about equality here with the news and free press people. How many people have we had on this podcast that have contributed to the news or free press or currently do so, Doc?
Oh, Vito, no doubt about it. I think that it's well established now. I think Al said it as well. You know, I think you're a guy, the Vito Chirco brand is taking off, a la the Big Baller brand. And a guy like yourself, when you pick up the phone and email, people want to come on your show. And I think the Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company brand is at its highest point right now. So let's just ride the wave and have a good time with it. And I think that, having guys like Al and the crew of guests that you bring on, it's always fun. So I always look forward to, and I'm sorry that I sometimes don't give you the schedule until like the day before, but, I think that part of the fun of my week is knowing when we're going to talk Tigers baseball. And I'm looking forward to the crew of guests that you're going to bring upcoming. We're inching ever so close to episode number 100, so I'll be on the phone maybe for you as well, advocating for a huge guest as well. So listen, it's all good in terms of the podcast, but in terms of the Tigers, I mean, I'm looking forward to the series versus Kansas City, but many people are commenting on the fact that in Game 1 is another left-handed pitcher from Kansas City that does not have a wealth of experience. And something I want to talk about before we end this podcast is, what do you think the reason is? And it's been a season-long trend. Everyone's noticing it, and it's become quite laughable that when the Tigers go up against young, inexperienced pitchers, they seem to struggle. We got half a dozen tweets that said, let's look at tonight's pitcher as having a chance to throw a no-hitter versus the Tigers. So what is it versus these young, inexperienced pitchers that is causing all these fits? Because you would think with this experienced, veteran-laden lineup that they could make in-game adjustments. It just seems like, it's becoming a running joke that, a young, inexperienced pitcher is coming up against the Tigers. He's going to throw 8 innings and give up no runs. What's the deal?
I think they take these pitchers lightly, but I also think in 2017 it's more about the roster and how the roster is structured, with the team being severely flawed too. I think that's a key note here to bring up, as I've brought up numerous times now throughout this podcast. But then Miguel Cabrera's not as good, Victor Martinez isn't as good. You're batting Mikey Matuk, who can't hit anybody anyways to save his life. James McCann barely can hit anybody. I mean, so you got guys like that who just aren't great major league hitters, or guys that are nearing the downside of their careers. Remember that too, but it's still no excuse. It's inexcusable when you do poorly against a guy like Brad Peacock. Do you remember that against the Houston Astros earlier in the season now? And if you do poorly against a rookie left-hander in Matt Strahm tonight, okay, that's bad on the part of the Tigers lineup and inexcusable once again. And then they face another rookie. 2 rookies in the series against the Royals at home at Comerica Park. Thursday, it's rookie right-hander Jake Junis, I don't know how to say his last name. He's pitching Thursday. So 2 rookies in the series, and they have struggled mightily against these pitchers that you think they would blow up and score 4 or 5 runs against.
So versus Kansas City, how many games are you pinpointing that they likely have a chance to win?
I'm going to say Ian Kennedy, by the way, struggled. He's pitching in the series 2 on Wednesday. He struggled the last time out, May 31st against the Tigers. He allowed 5 earned and 3 innings. Hasn't pitched great as a whole this season either, that veteran Ian Kennedy. So I think they could sweep the series. The thing is, I don't care where they're playing or who they're playing right now. The Tigers have looked lackluster on a consistent basis, and that's why they are losers of 8 of their last 9. So for me to be completely optimistic about the Tigers' chances in this series, even though they're playing, well, this team's been hot, by the way. In June, the Royals, I want to say this, too, to make it known to all you guys. They've been a good team of late, 15-7 in June. They have won 11 of their last 14 games, and they've won 5 series in a row.
If I read your article correctly, Freep.com, your series preview, which you do at the start of every Tigers series, is it true now going into the series, the Kansas City Royals are 37-37? They're at 500 right now?
At 500, correct. And it's because they've played so well in June, winners of 11 of their last 14 once again. They're a legit ball club right now and what they're bringing to the table. So for the Tigers, a struggling ball club, they might get swept, but they could sweep the Royals at the same time playing at home. But like I said, I don't think the home field advantage is as big of a thing for the Tigers at this point when the attendance numbers are dipping. And I've never thought Comerica Park is a big-time home field advantage. And that might bring up another topic and a can of worms here. But I don't think it's ever been, especially, too, when the Tigers are a struggling ball club. And I don't see them really turning it around on this 10-game homestand.
Okay, so you're still down on the Tigers, pessimistic. You think that even if they can win 3 games versus Kansas City, they still got a tough matchup versus the Indians, and it's going to be a tough situation in order to try and get a lot of different wins out of them. So it's going to be tough. But before we get out of here, there has been some Major League Baseball news, and there's been studies. People are looking at it. The average Major League Baseball game is around 3 hours now. And people are talking about, look, there's got to be ways to shorten the game. There's got to be ways to improve the game. One of the other aspects that people are looking at is the strike zone. 2-part question, and we'll end on this note. Should Major League Baseball consider making the game 7 innings? And do you agree or disagree with the notion that, look, let's just remove one aspect of the game that can be automated, and let's just have an automated strike zone where we don't have to have any mistakes? Because right now the error rate is about 10%. They're looking at, but it's a big number. They looked at kind of how many mistakes were made, and about 34,000 pitches were called balls that were supposed to be strikes, or strikes that were supposed to be balls. So the release has been that umpires make calls about 90% accurately, but
that's pretty good, though, I think, Doc.
Right, but at
human
the same
error
time,
is a part of the equation. Remember,
right, but at the same time, you can have 100% accuracy with an automated system. And HBO's Real Sports documented that, look, you can speed up the game if you just go automated. You can speed up the game if you lessen the time that the batter kind of goes in and out of the batting box. You can lessen the time with maybe shortening the clock even further for the pitchers to throw the ball. You got to find a way, because 3-hour baseball games are a drag, and it's hitting me now where, probably in the next week where we take off, I probably won't watch Tigers baseball all that much because the games are above 3 hours for the Tigers. They're one of the league leaders in average time of length of the game played. So are you in favor of methods to shorten the game, or maybe even going to the lengths of making the game 7 innings? Me personally, I like a traditional 9-inning game. I want to find other avenues of shortening the game, and I'm all for taking out the umpires. Don't need them. Utilize a computer. Get everybody situated at the start of the year. You get your strike zone. When they come up, boom, they call it. When the pitcher throws the ball, boom, it's relayed back, and the umpire can stand there maybe and still be employed. But his job is just to
to do what?
His job in the systems that have been implemented, his job is just to relay to the fans what's going on, and that's it. So what will happen is, if it is implemented that way, there's a computer, and the balls and strikes are called by the automated system, and maybe you have a little earbud in the umpire's ear. So the pitch comes, he doesn't make a call, he just relays. Someone will tell him ball, someone will tell him strike, and it will be as close to 100% reliable as you can get. Automated balls and strike system.
The umpires won't oblige to that. They shouldn't adhere to it. They won't adhere to it. And a lot of them would be out of jobs, because guess what? Major League Baseball would not be paying umpires just to stand there.
Well, Vito,
with an automated system for strike
you're in a
zones.
field where everybody's losing their job, so you hop on board. I feel like the umpires don't do a good enough job. I mean, look at it from this standpoint. Okay?
But it's hard to get everything right. I've umpired. I think I've told you that. I've spoken about it on this podcast. My brother does too. It is hard to get everything right. You're not going to get every call right. You're not going to call every strike that should be called a strike as a strike. You're going to call some wrong. And you know what? Things just go awry at times. And maybe it's a solution to shorten the game, the length of the game specifically, which needs to be shortened, but you're not going to cut it down to 7 innings. I guess it's more realistic doing it with the umpire system of having it automated with the strike zone calls and having a computer doing it. The thing is that would be laughable to me is, in what way or ways is it completely automated or computerized? Are you going to have a Toshiba laptop out there making all the calls? I mean, you're going to have the Toshiba laptop behind the catcher? I mean, how do they get the calls? Where do they get the calls from? That's the thing. Where are the calls coming in from? That would be my question for these guys. And would that take up time too? Because it might. Getting the calls. What if the technology, remember, how about technology? Technology has flaws. What if the technology just shuts down? Remember, that could happen. What if there's no Wi-Fi connectivity? Would it rely on Wi-Fi? What if there's no Wi-Fi at Comerica Park for a game? That could lengthen the game too.
Well, then, if there's an issue, then you just go back to the old way of where.
So what, you have an umpire there then, just in case, but he might not even be utilized? So you have an umpire traveling to all these games just to be there, just in case, to be the home plate umpire if technology goes awry at that given ball game. They're not going to agree to that, nor should they agree to that, those umpires. So I don't think that's going to get passed. Would it shorten the length of the games? Probably more often than not it would, but there could be that computer error. As much as there is human error and more human error than computer error, there could be that computer error because of a technological flaw or two. And those flaws could strike and lengthen the games even more than you would think.
Okay, Vito, I got it. You're no on automated balls and strikes. Where are you at in terms of 7-inning baseball game, shortening the game?
It's not going to happen because it's not baseball. It's not Major League Baseball. It's never going to happen. Major League Baseball is a very traditional league, traditional game of baseball that is played. So for me, I don't see it ever happening because I don't think enough owners, players would agree to making that change. So for me, it's just not feasible. And the thing is, it sucks because the games are too long nowadays. And for these kids who are still in school at some portions of early on in the season, these games go on too late. The kids can't stay up and watch them. There are adults that refuse to stay up to watch these games that are 3 hours long. I agree with them. I can see where they don't want to stay up for 3 hours at a time to watch a Tigers game, especially when they're a lackluster ball club that is losing more often than they are winning. So when you don't have a good product on the field, who's going to go to the ball field, but who also is going to watch the game on their TV, make the time for it when it's going on for 3 hours and you have work the next day or school the next day? So I think there is something that has to be done, and they've tried to speed up the game with the intentional base on balls, what they've done now where those balls don't even have to be pitched. When you want to intentionally walk somebody, maybe that's increased the speed of the game a little bit, but the games are still dragging on, and we've seen it numerous times this season already with the Tigers games, and it's not good when your product is already not good on the field. So who's going to keep watching when these games are 3 hours long and might even increase as the season goes along in length? Because when your team's more lackluster, you would think it might lengthen the game because you're going to have a lot of bad plays made, maybe errors, just long innings because your pitchers are more lackluster. And because of that, Doc, that could have lengthened the game even more. So when the Tigers decide to boot on this season completely, remember that could cause the Tigers games to even go on longer, which would just suck.
So as you were talking, I was thinking of this. What's the biggest headline right now in Major League Baseball? Because I've been focused so much on the Tigers that I've really neglected, outside of knowing that K-Rod went to the Nationals, Mike Trout's been injured. I really haven't even been kept abreast other than some of the news and notes. You know, Kyle Schwarber was sent to the minors because he struggled. I know that Max Scherzer has been unbelievable. People are talking about him. Doug Fister went to the Red Sox, had an okay debut. But other than that, I really haven't been keeping abreast across the league. Anything of note that's caught your eye before we get the hell out of here?
Scherzer and Verlander almost pitched a no-hitter in the same day last week. Remember that?
Both lost, too.
Both lost. Scherzer is a National League Cy Young candidate. Chris Sale is probably the favorite to win it in the American League. What a great acquisition by the Red Sox, who need him more than ever before because David Price has struggled since his return from the disabled list. Porcello, the weakest Cy Young winner in the history of Major League Baseball, perhaps at this point, especially when you look at his win-loss record. He hasn't been as mightily consistent, nowhere near a Cy Young candidate. So things like that stick out to me. And then the Rockies' success, especially hitting the baseball, the Diamondbacks' success this season, the Dodgers' success, and Kershaw, great once again. He could win the Cy Young very well again. And he's already done it before multiple times. So him and Scherzer might duel it out for that Cy Young Award in the National League. And the Dodgers and Nats might duel it out for the National League pennant. The American League might be more up for grabs. The Yankees have struggled of late. The Red Sox might make another acquisition for a third baseman. Maybe Mike Moustakas from the Royals, who leads the Royals in home runs and runs batted in so far this season with 19 and 46 in those stat categories respectively. So a lot of headlines and news that I just threw out at you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And that's all she wrote for this very edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company.
And you can download all Detroit Sports podcasts on demand 24/7 via our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com.